soul starts to linger, it's home I know. If you catch me daydreaming now and forever, thoughts are carrying me along to that place we call home. Down that long road, throughout life we roam. Whenever I go to that place I know it'll always be home, home to me.
Ontario's Bruce County is at the base of the peninsula of the same name that juts like a dagger into the Great Lakes. Here on the shores of Lake Huron, in Saugeen Township, lie the communities of Port Elgin and Southampton. As for the people who came here early in the 19th century, I have some quotes from one of the histories. Western Ontario was settled from the south. The weaklings dropped out in the county of Perth. The stronger seemed to get as far as the county of Huron, and only the giants were able to win through to the Bruce. Them's fighting words, I would say. In the next half hour, we'll take a look at this land of giants. The French called it Presqu'île, a near island. The British christened it the Bruce, but many of the old-timers still call it the Saugeen Peninsula, after its indigenous people. As much as the terrain reminded Champlain of his home in Brittany, France, it occurred to the first permanent settlers that it was much like the English seaside. So they chose to call this community at the mouth of the Saugeen River Southampton. And today it has a population of 3,000. Taken in the late 1930s, this film, depicting the early town, shows us a nearby church, the site on which nearly 100 years earlier, interaction began between white visitors and the native people. In July 1845, Paul Kane, the celebrated painter of Irish descent, recorded in his diary the wanderings of an artist the following. The Indian village of Saugeen, meaning the mouth of a river, contains about 200 inhabitants, Ojibways. It is the site of a former battleground between the Ojibways, or Chippewas, and the Mohawks. The land hereabouts is excellent, but only a small part is cultivated. The inhabitants subsist principally on fish, which are taken in great abundance at the entrance of the river. He goes on to describe some of the chiefs he sketched. Matikwab, the bow. Maskonunji, meaning big pike. He sketched the daughter of one of the chiefs, as well as Chief Wapus, the rabbit. He stayed here, where I am standing, for 10 days with the family of an Indian who was educated as a Wesleyan missionary. It's believed the man's name was George Copway, the first trained missionary in the area. The Wesleyan United Church stands on the site of the Copway Mission. One of a line of ministers to call the Saugeen Reserve his congregation is Earl Stotesbury. Earl's retired now. Come on, we'll meet him.
Hello, Earl. Hi, Harvey. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Absolutely beautiful.
Well, the church was built in 1891, but there were 2 log churches before that. And 2 ministers who were here during that time of the treaties and so on took a very active interest. Both of them were authors. One went to England to see the Queen, and the The church was so involved that it was in the log church where they signed the treaties for this whole part of Ontario. Now, there are not many places in Canada where the treaties were signed in the church.
In recent years, Stotesbury's dream has been realized, that of building an amphitheater to take advantage of the natural landscape.
When I sort of got the idea to go ahead with it, then I went to the town, or to the band council, and told them I'd like to build an amphitheater, and they said, sure, go ahead, do whatever you have to do. So they gave me a free hand. Well, I had about 60 young people in a good organization, and I had an old truck, and we had no money. I had enough money to buy gas for the truck, so we went around to farmers who had old foundations and so on, and so we got good cut rock from a lot of places. Tomorrow now there are 2 weddings scheduled here. The native people will be here next week with a drama. There are several groups that come, and they'll be here for 3 or 4 days at a time.
The gardens and the theater are the pride of the Saugeen community. It was shortly after Paul Kane's visit that Europeans moved west through Upper Canada to settle this area. They reached their destination by traveling the Owen Sound Colonization Road to the mouth of the Saugeen River. Although they would readily adapt to life in a coastal village, as Isabel Underwood describes, the last leg of the journey downriver to the mouth was an adventure.
When white settlers came, fishing became an important industry in Southampton. In winter, people would come up by sleigh, and when the ice broke in the spring, they constructed a raft and came down the river. And sometimes these experiences were quite harrowing, but there doesn't seem to be any record of anyone losing his life. Paisley Advocate tells in an early issue of a raft going through their town, and at one end was a cow and calf, and at the other end was a stove with smoke coming out of the chimney, and the wife was preparing breakfast there. That was the most common route, and these early settlers took up land along the Saugeen.
50 years into Southampton's development, a directory describing the communities of Upper Canada says fishing is the prominent industry, employing 70 men and 18 boats. There is a large tannery built by Messrs. Bowman and Zincan, and furniture factories established by the Knechtel family. Now, a century since that account was written, Southampton's population, which swells in the summer months, takes in the genteel activities of a village by the sea. Of the 2 names associated with the town's founding, William Kennedy shared in a commercial fishing venture. When it failed, he left to join the search for the Franklin expedition. His partner stayed on to play a role in the birth of a water transportation industry on Lake Huron. Ron Beaupre is a marine historian.
Well, the first settler was from the Orkneys. It was John Spence. He came here in 1848, and 4 years later, he had his own boat, the Seagull, and he was using it to get down to Goderich and back with supplies. Later on...
It'd be a sailboat, of course.
Yes,
yeah.
Oh yes, just a little 2-master, about 40 feet long, and not much of a deck on it. Basically, it's an open boat, but they also used it for fishing. And there was a great, fishing then. There were a great number of fish in the lake, and it was very good eating. Now, that was a very basic food staple, was fresh fish. In 1856, they had steamer service to Southampton from Goderich.
Taking passengers?
Yes, the paddle wheeler plowboy came in.
A
Twice.
paddle wheeler?
A paddle wheeler, side wheel driven, yeah. and she came here in 1856 twice a week.
This longtime landmark, the Chantry Island Light, has spelled a warning of the island's unforgiving shoals and has beckoned mariners to its leeward side to ride out any storm. And ways to capitalize on the latter motivated early entrepreneurs.
So they decided that they would try to provide a harbor of refuge. So in 1871, they started building this dock out of square timber filled with rocks all the way out from the northern tip of the island in a big arc around over towards the land. And this took about 2 years to build this thing. So they built it 71, 72, 73. So there was just a 400-foot gap in the middle between the island and the mainland. Now they built another pier out from the, yes, that's right. So they would line up the light that was on the tip of the west dock with this range light over here on McNabb Point. They would see the light out on Chantry Island, and they would work their way around to the north end of the shoals, line the lights up, and then run down through the gap into the harbor.
The efforts that prompted Southampton's growth were undermined in its fragile beginnings by non-resident land speculators holding out for profits. This, along with other factors, gave rise to a neighboring community that soon would rival it. As settlers began pouring into the newly surveyed township in the years following 1851, a customary route to the timbered and fertile soil here was down the lakeshore from the mouth of the Saugeen. This little bay provided an ideal site for another community. In fact, a man by the name of Lachlan Lochbuie McLean beat the rush, set himself up with a tavern, which I imagine was a pretty popular watering hole with some of those arriving settlers. One of those early families was the Brickers, Samuel and Catherine, and their 8 children. Sam soon had a steam-powered sawmill on the go, and the legend has it that he was responsible for planting all the trees along Port Elgin streets, thus giving the place its nickname, the town of Maples. Adopting the name of the Governor-General of the time, Port Elgin began to take form, growing to the present community of 6,000 people. Its early industries, a foundry, woolen mill, and grain storage elevators, gave the community a gain on Southampton, a friendly competitiveness that was to last for decades. One of its early newspapers was called the Busy Times, undoubtedly a comment on activities of the day. In 1883, John Hepner launched the Port Elgin Brush Works. The company grew to dominate life in the town, its factory whistle regulating daily routine. Bill Campbell.
It was something that people got up with and sort of went to bed with because it was a kind of an institution in the town. Up till even the 30s, when people started coming to the lake and cottages and cars got more plentiful, it was the only business. It ran the town. They stuck pretty well to wood, and it was run by a large steam engine. They had 2 engineers. It was running 24 hours a day. They had their own dry kilns, their own lumber mill. So the excess steam, they heated various houses in the vicinity of the plant, within a block. Some of them went as far as a block. And these houses were heated in the last few years at $100 a year, and they just dragged out. Their windows were always open, and their doors were open. It was so hot. The area around the houses, they could have cut grass in the winter due to all the excess steam and the leaky pipes. Basically, their main lines when I went in was the hardware line, other than the personal brushes. The bristle came from China, the pure bristle. But at one time, we had one whole floor that made nothing but household brooms. And then we had another floor that made nothing but curling brooms.
A related operation continues on the same site to this day. Walk the streets of Port Elgin on any summer day, and you'll know why it's known, like Southampton, as a refuge for throngs of escaping city dwellers. The drawing card, appealing to outsiders, is the same element that is prized by both communities. Those who shall be so happy as to inhabit that noble country cannot but remember with gratitude those who discovered the way by venturing to sail upon unknown lakes. These words, recorded by Father Hennepin, touring on the Griffin, the first ship to sail the Great Lakes, retains a message for inhabitants along its shores today. Lake Huron has shaped the history and character of both Port Elgin and Southampton, and its influence continues to unite them. And like many coastal communities, there is always the stuff of legends. Are there any folklore stories about Lake Huron, true or false? Tell me about those.
Well, I've heard of one, the Nettie Woodward went ashore in 1892 up on the north end of the Chantry Island Reef, and the crew were up in the rigging for some hours. One of the crew got off on a hatchboard and drifted right down through the gap at Long Dock. There were schooners anchored in the Harbor of Refuge, and in the middle of the night, this poor guy, drifted by on this hatch cover. He was yelling at the captain, you know, help me, and the captain thought it was just a drunk from town going by in a skiff, and he didn't realize till afterwards that this man actually drifted by and died of exposure on the beach. So there were still 3 crewmen up in the rigging of the Nettie Woodward, and one of them died of exposure, and the captain, or William Lambert, the lightkeeper, he went over and rescued the other 2. Now, so she's on the bottom with just the mast sticking up. And I heard this story, I don't know if it's true or not, that on some occasions, if you went over this wreck with a tug that would create a fair bit of wash, that if you looked over the stern of the tug, the mast would come up out of the water and then roll back down again. This is called the ghost ship of Chantry Island.
I thought you were going to say the man was still hanging on.
Oh, no, there was no man left on board.
June 10th, 1895. The migratory instinct, strong in human nature, is being on all hands cultivated by the increase and cheapening of facilities for travel. A large number of our frontier towns, not all located on our marvelously beautiful inland lakes, are in the race for a share of summer citizenship. This letter to the editor of a local paper comments on the turn-of-the-century boom in tourism. It would supersede any of the established industries in either community, giving them a common resource to focus on. By the 1930s, Southampton and Port Elgin resorted to competition for the fun of it, including this fire drill exercise. These images harken back to fond memories of earlier days in Bruce County.
Cars, of course, were common when I was small, but they weren't used in the wintertime. People traveled by horse. I went to a one-room school, the same school that my father attended and that my grandfather attended. One-room schools, I have fond memories of my life in a one-room school. I started teaching in a one-room school, actually, for 4 years.
Enjoyment was to be had with the simplest of events, sometimes with very little prompting.
I can remember my father talking about ball games between the school sections, and these would be largely attended. Garden parties where people made their own entertainment, and Christmas concerts were a large event in the year. Teachers' reputations rose and fell on the quality of their concert.
From a little book called Pioneer Days, published in 1903 and written by David Kennedy Sr. He had followed that earlier route through the Queen's Bush and down the Saugeen when he was a boy. I quote his parting comments. Referring to the struggle of the early beginnings, he says, "These days and these pioneers have all passed from the changing scenes of this world, having served their day and generation. But to them and their successors, all honor and credit is due for having changed a dense forest into a fruitful garden, and the haunts of the wolf and the bear into homes of peace and plenty, occupied by a refined, intelligent, and educated people, both in city and country, who are also in the enjoyment of many of the modern improvements of an advanced civilization." The giants who came to Bruce County could never have imagined another giant, the huge Ontario hydronuclear facility just down the way. Nor could they have imagined the hordes of visitors who come to enjoy the Lake Huron shoreline. Still, much of what we see in this corner of Western Ontario is a carryover of that pioneering spirit. The people of this region of Port Elgin and Southampton will continue to preserve and to encourage their way of life and to see to it that it is here for the next generation. I'm Harvey Kirk.
Down that long road, throughout